I have people all the time who tell me that one of their goals for the next year is to write a book. I say, wonderful. Why are you going to write a book? And they say, because it's going to build my business. It's going to put my business on the map. It's going to get me started. It's going to share with the world. It's going to impact. And I say, you know what? Let's talk about some of the facts about books and book publishing and book readership and decide whether that is true with some facts as opposed to with emotions. This is not helped by the fact that there are a whole bunch of people who really want to sell consulting services and publishing services and vanity publishing services, those kinds of things that tell people writing a book is the single biggest, the single fastest way to get your name out into the world. Well, unfortunately, the facts don't say that. Now, before I get into the actual facts, let me just share something with you. I literally have printer's ink running in my blood. My dad started a publishing business when I was 12 years old. My dad has published over 50 books. I wrote a book that was on the bestseller list for 2 weeks before the publisher took out bankruptcy and never sent me a cent. And so I literally grew up in the publishing world, running a printing press, running marketing, doing editorial in the publishing world. I understand the book publishing world fairly deeply. And I just want everyone to recognize what is really going on in the publishing world, to look at the facts as opposed to look at the emotion and the hype and the sales pitch and everything else like that. And so I love books. Can you tell? I love reading them. I love writing them. I love the entire business of publishing. But I don't want you to get caught up in falsities around book publishing that'll cause you to use a whole bunch of time and energy and resources that could have been used in other ways to accomplish amazing things. Now, recognize, again, I am not saying anything against book publishing. What I am saying is that there is a time to write a book. The key question is, when is the right time to write that book? There is a right time and there is a wrong time. All right. So oftentimes when I talk to people about books, I will say to them, why do you want to write a book? And here's what they'll come back with. So reason number one is, hey, I want to make money. I say, excellent. Let's look at the facts and see what they say. So let's start off with the time to write books. So I'm a very efficient writer. I refuse to buy into the concept of writer's block. I just sit down and I write. And if I block, then I skip 5 paragraphs down and I start writing. And eventually I'll come back and write the beginning. And so I'm an incredibly efficient writer. The book that went onto the bestseller list for me took 3.5 months of writing 4 to 5 hours every night. And so I'm just going to assume that the time to write, if you're an incredibly efficient writer, is 500 to 1,000 hours. By the way, I'm sorry, I need to make one caveat with all of this. I'm talking nonfiction here. Not fiction. I'm not even going to approach fiction. Fiction's an entirely different animal. It doesn't relate to anything that what I'm talking about. But if you're using a book to try to build your business, you're not going to do that with a fiction book. You're going to do it with a nonfiction book. And so apples to apples, let's talk about nonfiction. So if you're an incredibly efficient writer, 500 to 1,000 hours, probably more. All right. The average sales of a book that's published. If you self-publish that book, so you're putting up on Amazon Kindle, you're putting it up on Amazon, you're trying to get it out there into the world, is 250 copies. So the average person is going to sell, if they self-publish it, 250 copies. Let's just use a nice round number, which is high, of $10 a copy. So that means you're going to earn $2,500 for publishing that book. Frankly speaking, if you're self-publishing it, you're probably going to make about $5. So you're going to make about $1,250. from writing it. And I know you're going to say, but wait a minute, what about all the consulting gigs and things that come from that? I'll talk about that in just a minute. All right. If you get it published by a major publisher out there, on average, you're going to sell 3,000 copies. Now, recognize that if you're selling through a major publishing house, that you're probably going to make about, let's use a round number. If you're not like already a best-selling author, you're probably going to make about $1 a piece. And so you're going to make about $3,000. So you can self-publish and make about $2,500, or you can get it published by a major publisher and make about $3,000. The key thing is, let's go back to, remember we said it was going to take about 1,000 hours to write it. So that means that you're making around $3 an hour or $2.50 an hour. Certainly your earnings are going to be less than $5 an hour. You can drive for Uber and make more than that. So if you're doing it to make money off of sales of the book, it's probably not going to happen that you're going to make any significant money at all. All right, now let's talk about, hey, wait a minute, what about the consulting jobs and the coaching jobs and everything else that's going to come from that? Well, a lot of that has to do with the impact numbers that I'm going to show you in just a minute. So we'll come back to this and address it in just a minute. So the second goal that a lot of people have around writing books is they say, I want to have an impact on the world. I've got a message that I need to communicate to the world. And I totally respect that. In fact, I believe you should have a message that you want to communicate to the world, and that you should do it in the place and in the way that will give you the most impact on the world. And so now let's look at, of those 250 to 3,000 copies sold, how many of them are actually going to get read? Because if a book isn't read, it has very little impact. Now, you may get some impact because you're able to give a TED Talk, or you'll get people to come to your blog or to watch your videos or something like that. We'll loop back to that in just a second. So, on average, the statistics say that only 5 to 20% of all books purchased are ever read. Okay, actually, there's another even more interesting statistic, which says only 60% of all books purchased are ever even opened. So that means 40% of them do what's back there. Someone bought it, brought it home and said, this is a really interesting book. I'm going to read it someday. And they put it on the shelf and they never even open it, much less read it. But only 5 to 20% of all books are ever read. And that's not necessarily saying completed. Actually, I've seen other statistics that say that only 5% of all books started are ever completed. And so if 5% of books are read and only 5% of those books are ever finished, we're talking really small numbers. But let's use big numbers, okay? Let's assume that 5 to 20% of books are read. So at 250, so if it's a self-published book, you're going to sell 250 copies. That means that at 5%, 13 people are going to read that book. 50 people at 20% are going to read that book. But remember, that's not read all the way through. That's just started. If you sold it through a major publisher, 150 people to 600 people will have read that book. And so if you look at it in terms of hours per person impacted, at 1,000 hours, that means you get at most 0.6 persons impacted for every hour that you spend writing that book. Now, here's the core of this entire thing that I'm sharing with you, which is this. There are more efficient ways to impact people's lives. So remember, just a second ago, I showed you that at most 0.6 people will be impacted per hour you spend writing that book. And remember, the 1,000 hours was low too. Okay, let me just ask you a question. Do you think that you could spend an hour and create a video that would impact more than zero point 0.6 people? Do you think you could spend an hour and write a blog post and send an email out to the people on your list and impact more than 0.6 people? Do you think you could spend an hour and write a tweet or a Facebook post or an Instagram or a TikTok, for all that's worth, and impact more than 0.6 people? So my point is this: there are more efficient and, very frankly, I would suggest effective ways to change people's lives that make you more money and that change the world. So let's go back to the 1,000 hours that you're going to spend writing that book. In that 1,000 hours, you could probably create 5 separate courses. And let's just imagine that you're marketing that course and you make $500 for each course sold. All of a sudden, and let's just imagine that you sell 100 copies of that across a lifetime. So 100 times $500 means you're going to make 100 times 500, $50,000, right? Or is that 500,000? I have problem with decimals all the time, but much less if you put me on camera. That's $50,000. So at $50,000, and remember, we created 5 courses during that time, so 5 times that is $250,000. And so now divide that by the 1,000 hours, we made $250 per hour, not $2.50 per hour. So which would you rather do? Would you rather earn $250 per hour or $2.50 per hour? Would you rather impact hundreds, thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of people, or impact 13 to, what was the other end of that number? 13 to 50 people. Which would you rather do? Where would you prefer to spend your time? Now, I recognize for just a moment, let's go back to the whole thing of, but what about the consulting gigs and everything, all the job that comes from that? The argument that a book is not a book to be read, a book is an expensive business card. Well, let me just suggest to you for a moment something. I can spend 1,000 hours of my life and create an expensive business card. Or I can spend that 1,000 hours and create 500 videos that'll all of a sudden impact a whole bunch more people. What do you think the probability is that one of those is going to turn into a paying customer for me? As opposed to an expensive business card that someone is going to say, I got this for free, bam, it's in the garbage can. Or maybe it'll go on the bookcase, but never get read because they got it for free. There's a big difference between getting a book for free as opposed to going on Amazon, having it take it out of your credit card, arriving in the mail and going, okay, now I want to read this book. When I get it for free, it goes in a stack. And maybe, just maybe, 1 out of every 100 books in that stack gets cracked open. And maybe, just maybe, 1 out of every 5 that gets cracked open actually gets read. And so the probability of an expensive business card actually turning into a payday for you is incredibly low. Here's personally, I think that some of the people who go out and market, write a book and become rich, write a book and become famous, write a book and have a huge impact on the world, many of those are selling snake oil. And I say that with guarded breath because I have printer's ink running in my blood. Now, I do believe that there is a time when you should write a book. So after all this where you're saying, Don believes I shouldn't write a book, that's absolutely wrong. I believe you should write a book in your lifetime. But there is a certain set of criteria that happen around that. Here's what I believe, and this is after like a lifetime of being involved in publishing. It is the right time for you to write a book. So the wrong time for you to write a book is when you don't yet have customers and a business. Spend that time working on more efficient ways like videos and blog posts and articles and op-eds and PR and everything else out there to get your word out. That's the most efficient way to do it at that stage in your business. The right time to write a book is when you have over 2,000 people who have paid you money to buy the information that you sell. Ideally, you've got over 20,000 buyers who've paid over $500 to $1,000 to buy what you have to sell. And you have over 200,000 followers. Now, followers ideally means people who are on your list. The key thing here is this. You have to have the buyers and the followers. If all you have is the followers, you're not ready yet to buy the book because there are many, many people who have followers who write a book who can't sell that book. So now all of this assumes you're not famous. This is what makes you famous. Unless you go shoot somebody or commit a major crime or get in the movies or something like that. And so if you don't want to become famous by doing the media route of going out and creating a movie or being a star or being incredibly good looking and popular, well, remember, there are tons and tons of influencers on Instagram right now who have tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of followers who make all of their money getting brands to pay them to talk about their brand because they can't sell anything themselves because everything they've tried to sell themselves, nobody's bought it. So followers alone don't qualify for you being ready to publish. You've got to have buyers too. And ideally the combination of these two. So I really debated as I wrote this number, 200,000. I'd like to see that at 1 million. But when you're at that stage, here's what you do. You write the book, and as you're writing the book, you say, hey, I'm writing a book. It's coming out in 6 months. And what ends up happening is you suddenly start getting pre-orders. You get this group of people who are fans of yours because they've bought and because they're followers to want to read your book. And so many of these people who spent $500 to $1,000 to buy from you, there's all these people who can't afford to buy that. And so they're dying for your book to come out so they can pay $20 to get some of that information. That right there is what sets you up for making the bestseller list. Now, ideally, you've got a good publisher who's got a good publicity, and you've got a good strategy, a launch strategy and a pre-order strategy and a launch team strategy and everything else like that to put that together. But that is the time when it's right to write a book. Now, I'm going to make one other suggestion is that the best way to do that, to actually succeed with that, is if you've got a totally unique, real breakthrough that can be communicated in your title. So the fame from these guys will get you X amount of sales. But if you've got an offer that can be easily communicated in a title, like under 5 words, and you've got that following of people who have bought from you and who want to buy from you but can't afford to buy from you at $500 to $1,000, now you've got yourself a recipe for a major advance from a publisher. That's when you can go to a publisher and get a couple $100,000, $500,000 in advance because they know you're going to sell a whole bunch of copies and potentially could go bestseller. So that's how you do it. It's also not how you do it. Don't buy into, and oh, by the way, let me just bring up one other piece of poppycock. Pay us $2,500 and we'll put you, and write one chapter, and we'll put you into a book with 25 other people, and one of them is a best-selling author, and you're going to sell tens of thousands of copies. Well, guess what? You will sell tens of thousands of copies, because every one of those 25 people has to buy 1,000 copies of the book. And so, yes, you're going to sell 25,000 copies to the person who is going to have a bunch of boxes sitting in their garage or their basement full of books that they can't give away to anybody else, because everybody knows that those books are basically useless and there's really nothing in them of any value whatsoever. So please don't buy into that piece of malarkey either. Can you tell I have a strong feeling about this? It really bothers me when people sell hope based upon a lack of facts. In fact, when people sell hope where the facts say exactly the opposite. So, multi-level marketing is a great example of this. People sell hopes, the facts say no. Don't buy into fallacious arguments. Don't buy into spending 1,000 hours of your life that you could spend actually building your business, actually having an impact on the world, actually creating a stream of money flow that'll make a difference in your life and enable you to make a difference in the rest of the world. So, when's the right time to write a book? When you got an audience that's bought from you, and you have a whole large audience that would like to buy from you but just can't afford to buy from you at that cost, now's the time to write a book. And that's when you're able to go to a big publisher, get a big advance, which then forces them to actually market you. Because there's a whole nother piece about that. When they paid you $200,000 in advance, they've got skin in the game, and they're now going to go out and sell a bunch of copies to ensure that they get that $200,000 back. That's the way you pull this whole thing off. It's a system. You have to work the system. And time has proven over and over again that the people who try to go around that system by not having the followers and not having the group of buyers already are going to fail on that system. And that's why if they're able to get an advance from a publisher, it's going to be $2,000. Why? Because the publisher knows he's probably going to sell 2,000 copies at most. Sorry if I dashed your heart. Sorry if I told you something. And by the way, there are exceptions out there. I totally understand that. There are exceptions out there, but there are also people who get hit by lightning. And there are also people who win the lottery. And you know what? You can't count on either one of those. I hope you're not counting on getting hit by lightning. Think about this. Let me know what your thoughts are. What have been your experience in writing your own book? So, Linda, I self-published 2 books and next to no money. Susie, I wrote a book to take into schools. Anna, totally agree. I wrote a book in 2019 and almost ruined my business because I had no time to manage my consultancy programs, and I lost so many clients. I'm still recovering. So, hey, there's a few unsolicited testimonials of people making comments while I've been live. I'd love to hear your story even after I've gone live. This is Don Crowther saying, please don't buy into the malarkey. Save your book. Write it later. And in the meantime, spend those 1,000 hours to do something amazing. This is Don Crowther saying, just go do this stuff.